Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are really excited to have this conversation today. My name is Narelle Doan, and I am the Director of Marketing for Viking Pure Solutions. And today we have an awesome panel together who are going to be speaking about rethinking concepts like activities of daily living and memory care. So we have a lot to get through, but before I have the panelists introduce themselves, I just want to call out the Q&A section on the right-hand side. That's a little circle with the question mark in it. Please feel free to put any questions that you have for our panelists there. And if we have time at the end, we will get to them. If not, because as I mentioned, we have a lot to get through, then please do put your questions there and we will address them after the panel. And I will also be sending out a replay link. So you'll get all of that at the end. Please do not hesitate to put any questions there. So Nicole, do you want to start us out? You're moderating today.
I am. Thank you for being here, everyone, taking the time out of your day, show up, learn with us. We appreciate it. And this is really a collective desire to uplift our care community. And we want these conversations to offer really great dialogue. So we are all open. We are eager to learn. And we're really using this conversation around ADLs as that microcosm to really have bigger discussions. So thank you, Dan and Viking Pure, for thinking outside of the box, bringing us together, creating a space to have these important conversations. So we all have super unique perspectives and backgrounds, and I know it's going to be a dynamic conversation. And all of you, I realized, were my podcast guests. So super
nice.
Fun. I know. It's I'm like, is it my birthday? Like all my favorite people are on this call with me. So it's so great. So I don't know if we want to introduce ourselves really briefly. I am Nicole Will, founder of Will Gather and co-founder of Think Tank. James, I'll leave it off to you.
I'm James Lee. Nice to meet everybody. I'm also known as the Dementia Darling. Just kidding, Gary. I'm happy to be here and have this conversation. Carry the real dementia.
Okay, I'll take it away. I never know whose spot is next on your screen. But I'm Carrie Albert, and I go by Dementia Darling. I'm sharing education and advocacy for the dementia community on social media and outside of that as well. And then I work with Ugeria, which is an international company that is helping the quality of life for the dementia community. We always want to make sure that it's getting better and better as we go forward into the future. So happy to be here.
Adria or Dan?
I'm going last.
Okay, Adria.
My name's Adria Thompson. I'm a speech language pathologist specializing in dementia care. I own Be Light Care Consulting, where I have hundreds of videos about how to care for individuals with dementia on social media. Go ahead, Dan.
Awesome. Dan Lawson here, President of Business Development from Viking Pure Solutions. Our mission is to remove toxic chemicals from senior living communities, and it is just such an honor to be involved, on this panel with so many great leaders in this space as well as personal friends. So I'm very excited for today and very thankful for all of you.
Thank you. Well, to start us off, I think it's important we have context, right? So Adria, how do we define activities of daily living? Why do we refer to them this way? And I know right from your perspective, we have both looking at it from a senior living component, but also family caregiver component.
Yeah. So activities of daily living, as this is in the title of this panel, it is basically just a term that refers to tasks that we do every day to care for ourselves. So underneath the umbrella of activities of daily living, there's things like bathing, getting dressed, going to the bathroom, feeding ourselves, shaving your face, brushing your teeth. All of those things are considered activities of daily living. Now, the reason that we talk about, or that it's important to refer to activities of daily living, there's a few reasons. First off, as a therapist, I'm a speech therapist, but occupational therapists are largely in charge of assessing and treating any deficits in activities of daily living. And so we have to be able to have that term to refer to what we're assessing, to look at a person and say, not only what things they can't do, like they can't shower on their own, but how much that they can do on their own. So in therapy, we refer to activities of daily living all the time for documentation purposes. We also refer to them when it comes to creating goals for a person when they're engaging in therapy services. So if maybe right now they are requiring a lot of assistance with showering, the goal might be that they receive minimal assistance with showering. So that's a time where we talk about ADLs. Also, if a person is going to receive services, maybe in their home, or they're going to a long-term care community, like a skilled nursing facility or an assisted living, there are often pre-assessments that happen. So a nurse might come to your home and assess a person, and a big part of that is determining how they operate during activities of daily living. Once again, what they can and what they can't do, and that will help us guide what level of support and what level of services a person needs. Sometimes if they require too much assistance with activities of daily living, they can't go to assisted living perhaps, and they need to go to a skilled nursing facility. So there's a lot of times where we refer to and the activities of daily living come into play when we make decisions. I also wanted to say that throughout this conversation, we are going to not only be talking about the term activities of daily living, but other terms in senior care and aging. And it's important, all of us here on this panel are part of the senior care profession, right? This is what we do as a job. And because of that, it's important that we model positive person-centered language. We will get into all of that. But I just wanted to take a second and say, if you're a caregiver listening to this panel, this conversation is not intended to shame your choice of terminology, right? So if you use a term that we talk about that we feel has some kind of negative connotation, there is no intention here that we want you to feel bad for even for professionals using the wrong terms in the past. We're talking about, we just want to take this moment to kind of assess what terms we're using and if it's the right thing to be doing. So if you're a caregiver, don't worry, you're not going to say the right thing. You're in the trenches of just caring for someone, trying to keep someone alive. Don't worry that you're doing the wrong thing. But as professionals, it's important that we have these conversations so that we can be a good model.
Yeah, thank you. I love that you highlighted that. So important as we're just having conversation, right? And as we know better, we do better and learn as we go. James, language matters, word matters. How do the words we use in dementia care, like activities of daily living, resonate with patients, with residents, with families? Why is it necessary to rethink concepts? The term we're using is activities of daily living for advancing our profession in senior living and dementia care.
Yeah, and I didn't do a good job of introducing myself at the beginning because I was making a joke, typical James. But I am the owner and co-founder of Bella Groves. We are a memory care community and an education team based in San Antonio. We are trying to do a lot of things different in the world of dementia care specifically. I think that language and kudos to Adria for giving all of us the kind of disclaimer about we're not trying to shame anybody. I need Adria on every call that I do from now on. So it's a good way to lead into language isn't bad. And I'm not even proposing we change the term activities of daily living. It's the meaning we assign to the words that we use. And I think in particular, as leaders in this field, the words that we choose frame what our teams believe about what they should be doing, focusing on. So I'm going to say there's a term I heard. I never used it because it intuitively didn't feel right. But I remember walking around a community, somebody's touring me, and they said something to the effect of like, that table is where we have our feeders. I was like, your feeders? And I was like, what does that mean, your feeders? And you can probably intuitively guess what they were referring to, that it was people who on their ADL's chart may have said they need assistance with dining, right? That's the technical way we might describe ADLs in that sense. But the nomenclature that follows our ADL mindset can become this gross language, right? So I was like, feeders. And so I've never used that term, but we may be using that term in our industry still. And so I think that the words we use frame the intention of our team. So that's a good starting point for me to introduce that topic.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have thoughts about that?
Well, it's also like how, the words we use, of course, is for the staff and how they are seeing it, but also the family caregivers. If you're always attaching negative things to their loved one, they're not going to feel very positive about interacting with their loved one and wanting to do things because they're like, well, they can't. And it's just an automatic no. And we can't be going about that and creating this more negative, like, tragedy stereotype for these family caregivers that already, like you said, are in the trenches. We have to give something to work with. And those negative views can really just be a huge barrier for obviously the staff, but the family caregivers as well, in learning and wanting to meet their loved ones where they're at.
I think some of these generalized terms, like feeder, is also just not reflective of reality. Like, when someone requires assistance with a task, it doesn't mean that they can no longer do it. Like, it just means that they require assistance, right? So someone who might be labeled a feeder, that sounds as if they're dependent on someone entirely to be fed, when most of the time they can still participate. They might just need cueing. So I think that sometimes when we use generalized terms, we lump people together and we are underestimating actually what they can do.
Yeah, we may not get to a second question because this is going to be this is how we talk when we get together. Yes, and it's such a great way for us to dive into the topic of why language matters. And again, we're not proposing changing like activities of daily living. I think there are some terms that maybe we would all agree let's not use, like feeders. But the reason that the words matter is that caregiver, if they hear the executive director saying, and they're not mean-spirited about it, but they're saying, oh, this is where we feed, where we have residents that need to be fed. So anytime we use language like, hey, have you fed Mrs. Johnson? Have you bathed Mrs. Johnson? The way that we use that term, to Adria's point, it puts the other person at a deficit orientation, right? We're only thinking about them in terms of what they can't do, and I need to go there and do that thing for them. So if we change that language internally at Bella Groves, we will correct 100% of the time. If somebody says, hey, can you go shower somebody, we just gently remind them that we're going to go assist the person with their shower. So it's a little bit longer, but it's the right way to say it.
Yeah. So on that, for people, put in the chat, like, what terms are you using that you're redefining or looking at? I'm curious about that. And Carrie, you and I have had a lot of conversation about this. How does other traditional terminology, industry terms that we use, different phrases, memory care, caregiver versus care partner, facility versus community. Some other ones that came to mind is, combative or behavior, silver tsunami. How does that bring about discussion and influence our perception of the care provided? It's kind of an extension of what we were just talking about.
Absolutely. And it's, we talk about all of this, all of us have this on our minds, all the words you just described, they're all negative. So no wonder no one wants to age. No wonder no one wants to live in a senior living community, not a facility. But I get on my soapbox a little bit with this because we have to be the people speaking up to create change or it won't happen. So we need to be, as you said in the beginning, role modeling this. Our field is ever changing, right? Ever growing. We are learning new things about dementia every single day. So why is our vocabulary not changing with? Why are we not evolving? I mean, I'm sure some of these we've been using since the 80s, which is great, but maybe we need to, if we're still using them, that's fine. We're using ADL. But when we talk about this with our staff, we go into why we're using this, the history, there's more into, to talk about besides just that, that phrase. There's so much more behind these things. And I think we're maybe not doing the work to change with the times too, like everything, because it is hard. I mean, it's not like we can just change the vocabulary and be like, here. It's not easy. But we need to start modeling this. And when we're educating families, when we're educating new staff, we can't go with this tragedy narrative, because that's why we're here. That's why we're having, so many issues with the views that people have about living in a senior living community. That's why I love like Tailgate with Jack York. He's changing those views of, and Dash Media. They're changing the views around living in a community and how beautiful and how uplifting it can be. And that goes with our language of, we're not doing the language about what has been taken, what is still there, what is still able to be done in our lives. And so I just think, when I'm on the road, I meet a lot of people and I have a lot of good, insightful conversations. And I think it's just not everyone has the access or the access to education or these ideas. So we need to start bringing them about so we can start talking about it, because if we don't know, as you said, we don't know and we can't do better. So just opening people's minds to, we don't have to do it this way. We don't have to always, do it how it's always been. I think is, really tied to the language we use.
Right. And when you look at history, and like you said, I think you brought up, the 80s and what we've learned over time. I had an interview with Dr. Jason Karlowicz. It's not released yet, but he's very prestigious in his field. And he had talked about, when they first started practicing, they used the word demented and senile. And look how far we've come, right? We do not typically use that terminology. Maybe some people do, or families that just don't know how the language has evolved. But I think it's such an important observation that over time we evolve and we learn more in research and as we're growing in our field and our profession. So does anyone else? Yeah.
Sorry, Nicole, I just will say with the demented, I have heard that from a professional's mouth in the last year in front of people, in front of families, and it's heartbreaking. And again, we're not trying to shame, but if the people around that person modeled that that's not okay, we maybe could have, avoided that. And that's just such a negative way. And with like the feeders, it's so negative and it just lumps people together as like a number. You're a person and there's a person under that. They are living with dementia, but there is a person there. And I think we're just losing that person-centeredness. And that's why we're all so passionate.
Right. So instead of these like tragedy narratives, maybe terms, for you and your field, Adria, Carrie, James, experts, what language do you prefer to use, or do you model for people that might be looking for, what do we say instead of some of these other options?
So I'm a speech and language pathologist, and language is very important to me, the area of my specialty. And so as we're talking, I'm thinking, my question is, what makes these terms negative, right? Like, I think we can all agree that demented feels icky compared to dementia, but like, what is it that makes them feel that way? And so not to derail the conversation, but I think it's important to consider that it is our personal experiences and like our lived experiences that make some terms feel more icky than others. And so we're saying that says that we're not going to get it right, because in those of us in the panel from our previous discussions, we disagree about what things feel icky and what things don't. And that's absolutely going to be true for the people who are listening. This reminds me, so yesterday there was like an announcement made that Wendy Williams, who's like a talk show host, she has frontotemporal dementia, and I made a video about that. And the name of my business is Be Light Care, and my purpose in anything I do is to bring light to dementia, to illuminate it, but also to not make it feel so heavy. I bring a level of levity to my videos, and it's important for me to not express or further the tragedy narrative of dementia. And in the caption, I wrote that it's important to know that even though a FTD diagnosis is not great, that individuals still have life to live and they can still have potential for a meaningful life. And I got a message this morning from someone who has someone in their life with FTD that took a lot of offense to that, to say that in their experience, the person in their life is not living a meaningful life, and that it is tragic and that it is terrible, and that I need to be honest about that diagnosis. And it made me think about this conversation and the fact that like everyone's lived experience is different. We are advocating on the behalf of individuals with dementia for better terminology, because we don't want them to be victims, or we don't want them to look as if their life is over. So a lot of this language is not necessarily to like make people want to move into long-term care so that we can have higher numbers. Like, that's not the intention. It's so that when someone gets a diagnosis of dementia, it doesn't feel like a death sentence, right? Like, I don't know what the original question was, but I think that the terminology that we do use keeps that in mind, right? Keeps it in mind for caregivers and people who are experiencing the dementia diagnosis, that they don't hear this tragedy narrative, this scary language, so that they dread the rest of their lives, because they can live for a long time.
Right.
I have a thought on that. As I would, Adrian, I feel like we're helpful in conversations where we can see both sides of things. So I love the question of why does the word demented feel icky? And I think for us, at least for me, what I'm trying to convey to our profession is that, and I'm having this insight just listening to Adria's perspective about coming at it as a therapist. A speech language pathologist is a clinician, is a medical professional. I am not an SLP. In medicine, we need precise language. We need precise measurements. There is a reason that from a medical perspective, these terms are necessary. But for assisted living, memory care, we are not clinicians. We are not medical professionals. And I think we sometimes take on medical language to describe the things that we're trying to do. We need to allow medical professionals to use proper language, but how we lead as an organization matters a great deal, because we are, for the most part, leading non-medical professionals. So Adria's company is called Be Light. Totally makes sense. She could also call it Helping the Demented, and it would technically be correct using medical terminology. But the words that she chose, the words that Carrie chose, the words that we chose at Bella Groves, it matters to how it makes people feel, and it gives them an orientation to what they should do from that point forward. In particular, family members. Family members feel lost, especially in the dementia care journey. And Carrie does a really great job of providing love. I think she calls it a virtual hug for all of the caregivers. See, I'm learning everyone's content. But the words we use are instructional to our team. And I think that's, to me, that's the difference between using medical terms that must be precise and non-medical professionals like me trying to adopt that language.
Right.
Yeah, I was called out at one of the assisted living buildings I worked at because I was referring to my patient, and I said patient, and they said, we do not say patient here. They are not patients, they are residents. And I said, I'm a medical provider and they are my patient. There's moments like that where I'm like, okay, like we do see this differently, and we have language that's different, but yet still appropriate for each of us.
Right. So is there, as you guys are making me think, right? So is the language that we use, I don't know if behind the scenes is the right word, right? Or more as like professional to professional versus front facing, I guess. Do they need to be in alignment or not, right? So I'm just curious about thoughts on that. You know, how does that make a difference, James, right? For families, for community culture, does it need to be universal in that regard or not?
Yeah, this isn't going to shock anybody, but 100% yes. And I think what you described is the main fracture, the pain of our industry, of our profession, is that the language used behind the scenes in back offices and corporate offices does not match the words on our posters. And that is something that we have to have a big reckoning about. We can't use words to sell people. We have to use the right words of what our mission and our vision actually are. And so, yeah, I thought at one time the best way to make an impact in this industry was keep getting promoted, and I'll get to those, suits and rub elbows with the right people that I will be able to make a difference. And in a lot of those situations, I was just so disappointed about the language that was being used. I was like, okay, then all of the words that are at the frontline level, that's just for show. I feel like we need to let Dan talk because he's just nodding.
I
and
know.
smiling
No,
politely
no.
for us.
He's next on my list.
Okay.
He knew what he got himself into.
Yeah, just go to the backstage,
next on my
Dan. We'll
list.
take
I
it
mean,
from here.
what's actually really interesting, listening to this from, a service provider perspective is how much, work that we put into our messaging, to make sure that we're trying, to, align with, cultural acceptability, at the community level, and then seeing, really how different it is, from operator to operator, community to community. It definitely does seem like a moving target, from our perspective. What we never want to be portrayed as is insensitive, or not emotionally intelligent, to, what, the right way, to provide like our value proposition. But it can be challenging, in an instance where, perhaps we chose the wrong vernacular, and essentially maybe have like ruined our credibility because we don't have that, that right touch. So, but yeah, it can be challenging from time to time, but it's so enlightening to hear, all of you, just share your insight. It's very, very educational and, an honor to hear it firsthand.
Well, I'm sure you have such a great glimpse into that because you are in so many different communities, right? So your view, and I think our words change our thinking, and then our thinking affects our actions. So what have you witnessed? Like how, if we're changing that, how can communities, right, actively engage? And if we're thinking about what can people still do? So how can they empower the residents that they support, Dan? What do you notice about that?
Yeah. So, having an opportunity to work with, amazing people like James and others in the space, what it seems so paramount to me and to my team, at Viking is that, a community's ability to provide the most effective care means, really maximizing, those opportunities for, these individuals, to reconnect, potentially, right, with a world that, they, perceivably may be losing access to. And it's really neat to see, how caregivers and researchers are increasingly finding ways, that sensory experiences, created through art, created through like music therapy, I've seen a lot, and physical activities, like cleaning, for example, just because that's like my arena, really does give, senior loved ones, with dementia, very positive emotions that they may have lost the opportunity to experience. Just like from my perspective, a community that has the tools to keep a clean and organized community makes it easier to create an environment where residents can look and feel their best. There's some amazing studies, peer-reviewed, published studies, even recent, within the last, 1 or 2 years, that show that the acts of cleaning can help reduce anxiety, depression, stress, and like simple things like, just dusting, disinfecting, after an activity session, cleaning, up the, whatever, they paint or, whatever they were doing, just, may give an opportunity to gain a sense of accomplishment and feel less stressed, like in their environment. So, that's just, things that I've had, just the pleasure to observe, and see some really, really creative, integrations of safe products, obviously, where, you don't have to fear, the negative challenges, with some of those types of things with traditional, maybe products. But again, that's more kind of specific to my arena, but that's my impression.
Yeah. They can safely do it, right? And not be held back by that. And I think, some of the communities you work with have programs where they encourage that. I think is one Spark. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. They have a Montessori based program. Through Spark.
To be able to do that. Yeah.
I was going to say, I can't imagine being a service provider in long-term care and staying like on top of even just like this conversation of terminology and wording, because not only do you have to be an expert in the products that you create and everything that goes into that, but then you have to enter into this world where there's so many nuances of care, medical side, and then also just like, caring for people.
Yeah.
I imagine that would be hard to know how to market, how to communicate those things.
Yeah, well, I'm lucky, and I consider myself lucky because I was fortunate to kind of grow in this space, and spend a lot of time in these environments growing up. So I'm very hypersensitive, to being in someone's home, and not necessarily at a place of work, but I do agree, and as part of kind of our training and education in this space. It's a constant effort to, I think, remind those, to these, very specific intricacies, as they pertain to, caring for older adults.
Yeah.
Well, and I agree, Adria. Like, I think that my advantage, because I do sales for Ugeria, so I am on the road sharing the Tober Topple, the Cradle, and other innovations for dementia care in all different settings across North America. And I think my, 11-year background is so helpful to my sales, journey. And I don't consider myself a salesperson. I think that's a joke when someone says I'm sales, because I'm just like sharing what I'm truly passionate about for the dementia community. I think everyone should have access to these things. But I agree. I think, doing sales in this space, you have to have some sort of connection and past in it, or you're not going to understand your people. We have to know the people we're serving on multiple levels. And I feel I'm really blessed that I have that experience, because it helps me meet them where they're at and not feel like a salesperson, because I'm like, it's okay if you can't get this right now. Here's all these other things that are here for you, and so.
Okay, Nicole, you asked a question a minute ago to James, but I want to answer it.
Yeah. Go.
Okay, I'm gonna.
We knew this would happen. We're like, I love it. Go.
Okay, James and I have a tendency to disagree about things, and we have similar perspectives, but we have like such different opinions sometimes, and I love it. Okay, so you asked like, what the behind the scenes communication and front of the house kind of whatever, should it align?
Right.
And although I have the same answer, yes, I think that what I mean by that's probably maybe a little different. So I am a huge proponent of caregivers, like personal family caregivers, understanding the medical terminology about dementia. I think that we need to be using, I know that assisted living, memory care, that this is a residence, this is their home, and that although it may not be technically a medical setting, I think there is a lot of benefit in understanding medical terminology and communicating that to families so that they have a better understanding of what they're seeing. So to give an example, I had a lot of trouble feeling like I was a clinician who was more deficit focused, although I know person-centered care is better. And I had a hard time wrapping my mind around, like, I know that person-centered care is important, but it's so important to know what deficits they have. And it wasn't until I was actually at Think Tank and I was talking to my group where I kind of helped realize what I was doing, which is when we can separate the disease and have the terminology to talk about the disease, the neurological underlying impairments, the changes that are happening with the brain, then we can then see the person better. Right. So if we can separate the disease from the person, then we can have an easier time in seeing them and writing goals for them and serving them better. So if a family member all the time might be like, oh, my mom is in such denial. She does not believe that she has dementia. When I have the opportunity to say, she's experiencing something called anosognosia, which happens in the frontal lobe of the brain. And it's not that she doesn't believe she has dementia, it's that she doesn't have the capacity to understand and be self-aware that she has dementia. So it's not a choice she's making, it's a symptom of a disease that she has. And when we have like little conversations like that, when we have that medical terminology, they can stop being so angry at their mom and just be angry at dementia. That's okay. You know, like, but we need to see the person more clearly. So I think that senior care needs to be better equipped to have those more medical conversations with families so that clarity is given.
Yeah.
Atria and I are in agreement on this particular one. The language, and we do that all the time. And we talk about Bella Groves being a center of dementia education. And this is part of it. We've started using that term. I always butcher it, but anosognosia, I think.
Good, that's good.
But learning words and using proper terms in the right context with families helps. And I think using terms in the right way with our care team in particular helps. The language, Nicole, earlier when you asked the question about the office and the front line, essentially, where are they aligned in terminology? I'm talking about things that feel innocuous, like the term back there. If you are in an ILALMC community and you say the phrase back there, 100% of people in our industry know what back there is referring to. Right? And that's the language. That's the language that if we as leaders aren't willing to change and confront and be like, why do we call memory care back there? It's not, and for me, it's important, not even just what words we use, but how and where we use them. So like our name tags, for example, it's in front of me, our name tags just have that, right? So it's not just the fact that we're not using terms like dementia care, memory care, James Lee, owner, Bella Groves. None of that matters in terms of how we're utilizing language to build a connection. So for our residents, our name tags are for our residents to be able to have a quick little cue of, oh, that's James, right? If they choose to use it. But it's not just language, it's how we use words. And this constant imagery at our community that everybody is a care partner, a caregiver first. There are no titles. Functionally, do we need to know titles? Of course. Functionally, do we need to know we are a corporation and and this is how we talk about the business of what we do? Of course. But the language and how we instruct people to view the work that they do, that's, I think, what we're talking about in terms of rethinking concepts in memory care.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, James, I've never heard back there, just like referring to like people and
You've never heard that?
No.
So people who are on the in the audience right now, if you've ever heard the term back there, could you these emojis, just do a thumbs up emoji if you've ever heard back there referring to memory care.
Like hidden away. Like hidden away back there. Okay. Yeah. I had never heard it, but going with that, I don't love the name memory care. Like
we don't use memory care.
So I'm used to them just saying like, oh, there's the memory care, which is only just a locked door.
Right.
No, not much difference. Maybe they have some training in the beginning of their job, but in my experience, that's what I've seen. But I've never heard back there. So thank you for bringing that up.
Carrie, why do you not like memory care?
So because there's thank you for asking. Dementia is not just like having trouble with memory. That's actually one of the lesser things, right? So that we see, there's so much more to it. I think we were joking, we were like, it could be the executive functioning care, like there's so much more to it.
Yeah.
And that automatically puts a label on a person, right? And what if you're not having trouble with your memory yet, or in your journey, and you're like, I live in a memory care, it's locked, I don't know why I'm here, what is going on, I don't relate to these people. I don't know what the answer is. I would love to know what your guys' like thoughts are. Like, should they even be separate from assisted, or should it be, based on level of care? Should it be everyone together? Like what? I don't know, but I don't love the label memory care. I just think it doesn't encompass what's happening.
Yeah, because actually when someone needs the assistance that memory care provides, the biggest red flags are like, elopement risk, like poor safety awareness. And so memory is actually lower on the totem pole as far as like the symptoms that would indicate that you need that kind of.
Right.
Like
If
safety
you-
care.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
In traditional thinking in our field, if you have memory impairment and that is your only change in your ability, most of those people are going to stay in assisted living for the most part. So I think proper terms like dementia care is important. But again, going back to an earlier point about it's not just what words we use, but it's how and where we use them. Bella Groves is just called Bella Groves. If you search for Bella Groves, we're not called Bella Groves Dementia Care Facility, Dementia Care, or Bella Groves Memory Care or Senior Living. It really hurts us online. On our SEO, it really hurts us not to have those terms. But it's a commitment we made from the very beginning of our company that when our residents and our families see the brand of Bella Groves, they are not shown memory care like in their face all the time. Think about the effect of families and residents driving back from lunch, and every time they have to see signage that says blank senior living, Alzheimer's and memory care facility all the time on the brochures, on the name tags, everywhere around them. So we've chosen to eliminate language. It's not even about what's the right term or not, but we've just chosen to think of language in a very thoughtful way that we are informing people how they should feel in this space.
I love that you said that, James, because I always have like an inner conflict, especially when I'm in a community talking about dementia tools, care tools for the caregivers. When someone with dementia is there and I'm speaking about, difficult things or struggles that caregivers have, I always am like, should I stop? Like, is this appropriate? So that's a whole other conversation we need to have. But like, I don't know what's appropriate, like in front of people with dementia too, because it depends on the person, of course, in anything, right? Like they might not even know, so they don't care. They're like, yeah, those dementia people, you gotta help them. That's usually, and I'm like, yeah, thanks, But I think that's another thing that's so hard to know. And it's like the families, if it's posted everywhere, it is in their face. And then I think the families don't know too. Like, do I tell them? Do we talk about it? Do they read that sign and even like notice? So yeah.
I have a really cool story from yesterday. We have a new resident that joined us recently, and we were sitting out on the porch, and she saw one of our shirts that said Bella Groves, and that's all it says, Bella Groves, and it has our logo, and it says Unconditional Joy beneath that. And this resident said, "Oh, Bella Groves, I was there all day." And I was like, how was it? What was your day like? She's like, it was really good. So she didn't see Bella Groves Memory Care Facility. She saw our branding and she identified with it in a way that made her feel good. How many times have you ever heard a resident in a memory care facility? I know I'm using the term on purpose to elicit emotion, but how many times have you had a resident be like, oh yeah, I live at blank blank senior living memory care facility. I had a great day there.
Yeah.
To answer your question, Carrie, I definitely think that there's room, of course, for communities that are tailored to individuals with dementia, especially that require some level of safety, security, even to keep them safe. I think that it's completely appropriate, simply because I have worked in assisted living communities where there have been people who have progressed to the point where they are leaving the community frequently and putting themselves in dangerous situations with little to no insight. And so absolutely, I think that there is space for places like that. It's extremely important, and it meets a level of care that many people have. What we call it, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And I wonder, as we learn more about each dementia, like we know society is starting to learn a lot about FTD, right? Because it's in the news. And it's like that, the care that FTD needs is going to be so different, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I wonder if one day, and I know, again, this is a whole other conversation, but I'm just thinking like, I wonder one day if there will be specific, community neighborhoods for inside a community, neighborhood for FTD approach of care.
Right.
Or Lewy body approach of care, because it's not, we all know it's not a one size fits all. And so being able to say like, oh, I took memory care training, it's like, cool, what do you mean by that?
Yes, that's so true.
Care training. I took Lewy body care partner training. I took, dementia general training. I don't know, but I look forward to it being more streamlined in that sense.
Right.
So Lorenzo's house is developing an adult day program specifically for individuals with frontotemporal dementia. And so
amazing.
That it is happening,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think the education and the tools, right, they're going to be more effective if we can reach then those certain populations with that, just to optimize that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
How are we doing for time? Do we want to dive into questions? We didn't get through all of our questions, but I think we covered a lot. And
of course we didn't. I'm surprised we got through like 5.
I know.
We have not had any questions from the audience in the Q&A section, but the chat is on fire, loving it. So audience members, if you guys do have questions, feel free to pop those in, but I think we can take maybe one more question, Nicole.
All right. Yeah. Talking, Carrie, I know you and I have chatted about, terminology, right? Activities, activity room. There is also common workforce frustrations that we have, and staffing shortages at time, education, how does language, how do we perceive that through those challenges, and focusing on the strength, pulling in tools. I love your lens on how you educate people. Are there things that you found to be successful when people are maybe overcoming some of those challenges? And then I'm also going to pull Adria in, because I think a lot of it ties to that Montessori philosophy, and what we can learn from that as well. So
yeah, and what James is doing, with a Montessori approach, I believe, like making sure that his residents are part of their daily lives. It's not just like, I'm going to do puzzles at 2 today and that's it. Like they should be part of their daily life, and they should be able to have the opportunities, like you said, cleaning, and like Dan with your cleaning, it is very powerful. To us, it's like, you're going to make me clean, but it's like, that is purposeful. That is going to make me feel like I am able to provide something back to the people that are helping me. There's so many wonderful things. And actually, as you were talking, Dan, it made me think, if you're not familiar with the Tovertafel, it's in Dutch, it means magic table, and I sell it at Ugeria. Please email me or message me if you want more information. But the Tovertafel has a cleaning game to situate people in time that a meal might be coming, because sometimes with dementia we might not know we need to be hungry yet, and we don't know like the timing of the day necessarily. So with the Tovertafel, a lot of us know the trick. You refold towels, and they fold towels, and then you mess them up and you say, oh, more out of the dryer. You do that for so long. Tovertafel literally has where you can shine silverware with a rag, and you shine the silverware, and then it turns into a full dining table with food after. And that's when you bring in the food and start that transition. But that gives the caregivers, 20 to 30 minutes of them helping as you're getting the meal ready. And, there's so many tools that you can use to facilitate them being a part of their daily life where it's appropriate, because maybe the shining of silverware in actual form is just a little too difficult now. But the one on the Tovertafel, you can use a pinky. I mean, you can use any touch and it will do it. So you can still feel, like you're contributing and you're accomplishing things. So I think, tools like the Tovertafel and tools like Zinnia TV, teaching how to meet them where they're at and giving them things that they can engage with that also is supporting the care partners is huge. But it's, not taking things away from them and saying like, we only do activities in the activity room, No, like their whole life should be an activity, right? Like it should always be them included in the process. So I think, that's really hard we're all dealing with issues with staffing. I get that. And that's why utilizing tools and utilizing your residents that can help and start things and do things, be creative and don't, get rid of the barriers in your mind that, oh, that's just going to be too hard if they do that. It's not going to go well. Or, if they, I'm going to have to do it after. Who cares? But yeah, just let people be involved in their lives is what I think is helpful.
Like that.
Yeah. And for anyone who may not be familiar with Montessori, that's based on the Montessori approach that was originally created as far as like for children. Maria Montessori created it over 100 years ago, but we're finding recently that you can apply the Montessori approach for individuals with dementia with great results, basically. Everything that Carrie's saying, which is increase engagement, feeling a sense of purpose. And so using those principles of Montessori basically just it highlights respect, autonomy, dignity, engagement for the person with dementia. And so a lot of the Montessori concepts are very person-centered, which is everything that we've talked about, focusing on them and not necessarily what they can't do. It focuses on making sure that they feel a sense of purpose and inclusivity to the environment around them and the community they have around them. And so all of these concepts with Montessori fits really well with all these conversations that we're having. And so for anyone who might be listening who is unfamiliar with Montessori approach, I really highly encourage you, Dr. Cameron Camp and Dr. Jennifer Brush have done a lot of research about that. And it's shown to just really increase not only, engagement and things like that, but also like nutrition. People who are engaged daily with items and objects, they are more participatory, and they are at a lower risk of weight loss even too. So which is really interesting. I also am going to put in the chat, it's a PDF through the Alzheimer's Association. It's an inclusive language guide. So there are many different, Australia has one, Canada has one, and the UK has one. And most recently last year, the Alzheimer's Association created one. And it's basically a don't say this, do say this. And of course, some of you might disagree with some of those things, but I highly encourage you to review that just to kind of know the state of what is being determined appropriate and not in senior care.
Yeah. So
Cool.
much.
We also had one question from Angie that relates to that, Adria, and James, she specifically calls you out. Do you know of any facilities or communities that have a simple one-pager that they share with caregivers and staff to use to educate the language and why they choose that? I think it's also something that Adria and Carrie can speak to as well.
Totally.
On the resource side.
Yeah, no, I love the resource that Adria shared and Carrie spoke to. It. I'm not particularly. We're going to write one now. Thank you, Angie Gray. But where I'll take that question and the theme and the feeling that we're having right now is we're not trying to police language. I was texting with some of our friend Lo Hornbuckle. I don't know if he's on the call, but anyway, he was like, "Oh man, I'm really annoyed with people trying to police the language, and I don't know what word to use." And so it isn't about policing language. We're going back to what does your language inform all of the relevant parties, all of the stakeholders in the positive outcome of the person we're all trying to help in the first place and support in the first place. How does the use of language, appropriate medical terminology should be used in this context, non-medical terminology should be used in this context, but I think it is the responsibility of the leader, the top leader in particular of an organization, to be very thoughtful about how and when you use the language in your own organizations. And I promise the ripple effects of that are going to carry through to everybody who is affected by how you talk about the work that you do. So I dodged the question.
Well, can I also add that when we're talking about language, when it comes to individuals with dementia, we also need to follow the lead of individuals with dementia.
Totally.
And so, there was a situation in which I had a patient who referred to their incontinence product as a diaper. And as we know, for individuals with dementia, especially Alzheimer's disease, they have short-term memory loss. And so language that has been modeled for them, long-term modeled, things that they have been encountering and saying for 40, 60 years is going to be more familiar to them. And so to use terms that we deem as more positive, more appropriate, might not necessarily communicate well to the person with dementia. And so we need to follow their lead, even if it's not necessarily politically correct, or obviously there's some limitations there, but we need to follow their lead as far as the terms that we use to.
Agreed,
Yeah.
Adria. And that's why this conversation is so hard. And because there's so many
nuances.
I want to have this conversation, but it's okay. Because it is it's okay. Yeah. And again, yeah, like you guys said, never shaming, never anything like that. We just want to start this conversation, as we've stated, because this is not going anywhere. It is only getting more intense and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so if we can help shape a little bit more positivity in here, that's going to equate to better quality care for all of us.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And based on, right, so many thoughts and discussion, I think we have future conversations to have, right? And more
Indeed.
dialogue and keep it
Mhm.
going for sure. So it'll be good.
Awesome.